My voice wants to fluctuate like I'm going through galactic puberty.
Oh my God. Is this whole Earth experience just galactic puberty? Hello and welcome to Frequency Broads. I'm Tara.
And I am Victoria. We're so excited you are here with us today. This is our 10th episode. We are super stoked. It is actually the last one of the season,
Mm-mm.
and it's going to be a powerful one. Let's begin today by grounding down through our sits bones, anchoring in through the hips, uncrossing your ankles or legs, planting your feet on the ground, gently closing your eyes or with a soft gaze in front of you. Begin to tune into your breath. Inhaling into the very bottom of your belly and allowing the air to rise up through your ribs into your chest. Gently exhaling through your mouth. We're going to do 2 more breaths like that, but as we do, let's begin to move the spine, rocking your hips, your abdomen, up into your chest. Start moving your body in a serpentine-like fashion. Even getting into your neck. You might feel some creaks and cracks in parts of your body you haven't tuned into for a while. Inhaling one more breath. When it reaches the top, suspend it, hold for 1, 2, 3, and powerfully exhale all of that air out of you. Whew. Making any sighs or moans or groans. Feeling more presence in your body than maybe you had felt a minute ago. This is our attempt to bring you into the body and out of your mind.
A much needed exercise for today's topic, Victoria. Thank you.
Mm.
So let us start off by saying that this episode is going to be wild. Okay. When we're talking about channeling, which we've mentioned prior, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today, the the beings in which we are channeling are not as serious as a lot of spiritual mentors claim it to be. I mean, I understand the importance of structure and understanding what's going on, but they are literally like, I'm not just like, you know what I mean? Like, I am all over the place. The energy is all over the place today because they are all out. Every lineage of the stars is here to play today. So if you see Victoria and I getting a little crazy, it ain't us, okay? Like they're just like, we gotta have fun. This is a big, serious topic and has a lot to digest in the brain. So get the brain out of it, have fun, let it sink in because it's crazy.
Well, I'll take some responsibility for some of the crazy because we're here to have a little fun, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Listen, I fully acknowledge the feeling of being spiritually hungry for information and experiencing the rational mind step in to try to make sense of it all, as the beautiful mind does. But it's really important to note that none of what we're about to say makes sense in the mind. This information is felt on a cellular level in our theme for today, DNA. A. it's, it's our DNA is where our true sense of knowing exists. Knowledge outside of oneself is the expression of someone else's DNA. I know, snap,
That
right?
was so good. Oh my God.
which, their DNA unraveling could be truth for you, but it's likely to change as you carry along on your spiritual journey and begin to unravel your DNA codes.
Mm.
And I'm a firm believer that the key to more unraveling to take place is to be open to change, open to receiving more insights or downloads, and getting out of the mind and into the body.
Mm. Which I think is a great connection to last episode because we mentioned things like hierarchy and I think spiritual bypassing, and we were talking about spiritual businesses, and something that we've touched upon many times in many episodes is that you need to find what resonates with you. So when you come across a spiritual leader or teacher, and don't get me wrong, I consider myself that as well. Those are good things to be and have in your life. Good mentors and resources, as we say all the time, is essential. We can't do this alone. However, you do have to find your truth, like Victoria said, and others' truths are being expressed. That doesn't mean that it is the one and only truth. So when a spiritual leader says, you have to do this and you have to show up in this way and you better come back for another reading in this way, that's, in my opinion, a bit of a red flag. What I say to my clients is, what I'm getting from your guides and mine is this would be a good opportunity for you to explore this. However, at any point, it does not resonate with you anymore, or if it never does, don't fucking do it. Don't come back. I don't care. Whatever is going to resonate with you is the most important thing. So when people claim to be all knowing or what have you, like, okay, yeah, but so am I, and so are you. So that's why we're going into that concept of DNA, because that is where all of this information is stored. So for someone to say that they know more than you, maybe they have more or an easier time accessing that knowledge because maybe you just have a little more work to declutter inside to get it. But that does not mean that this power and knowledge is not accessible to you.
Thank you for clarifying all of that because it's really important to note that we're all operating on different timelines and trajectories. And even if you have not been spiritual your whole life and suddenly find yourself here intrigued by this information, it's okay. You're not behind in any way. This is perfect. This is what we like to call divine timing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes sucks because we're human and we're impatient and we want things to happen right now. And actually, a lot of things are going to begin, I think, over the next few decades, begin to happen a lot faster. Like manifestation isn't even, it'll be like breathing. You think a thought and then it happens, kind of. I think it's so interesting that spiritual leaders are still out here running this game. And I feel so called to be here on this podcast, be part of Frequency Broads because there's just so much bullshit out there. It's not fun, first of all. A lot of it is so heavy. A lot of this is heavy to begin with, right? But I think having a spiritual teacher or leader who makes it feel even heavier or daunting or like you're or perpetuating guilt and shame and fear. No, that's what we're steering away from. We're not doing that anymore. We're here to have a good time as we tune into our DNA and heal because it's not always easy. It can get really dark, but knowing how to balance out the two of the darkness and the light is what it's all about. So, just because a spiritual leader speaks with authority and it sounds convicting and like the truth does not mean it is. Please, please, please practice discernment, and we're here to encourage you to understand resonance first and foremost. And it makes it a lot easier to discern what's working for you and what's not. And being able to release the information you receive when it no longer serves you. So letting go of old beliefs, making space for new ones. And where does that happen? Perhaps your
In your
DNA.
DNA. Absolutely.
I'm ready to dig into this DNA.
Hell yeah. So I know we said let's get out of the mind, but I love, and I think I've mentioned it before, I love finding the connection in science and mathematics. I mean, the more that I learn, it really is a quantum physics game. And I am not even going to touch quantum physics because I could barely say that word. Never mind know what the hell's going on. So I did a lot of research to refresh my brain to think about these concepts such as DNA and genes and cells and all that stuff so we can have a basic, high school biology understanding of these terms before we dive into what we're going to be really honing in on, which is that spiritual DNA. So bear with me while I go slightly through the science with the research that I gathered, although please, I am not a biologist. So I'm going to be the teacher in the room and try to communicate as clearly as possible. And I'm going to start with a visualization of where this lives and how it looks. So we know that all living organisms have cells. Within that cell, there's all these little cell components, and there's like the center of the cell, the nucleus, and that is where your DNA lives. So now we're talking like real freaking small. And then within that DNA, there are 12 strands that we're going to be talking about. And each of those strands are made up of molecules. And each of those molecules are made up of atoms, which have subatomic particles, electrons, neutrons, and protons. And the reason why I go that deep is because the two concepts we're going to be touching on is both DNA, genes, and the electron. So I wanted you to see that visualization of how deep the electron runs through all the small molecules within the DNA.
No, I was like Anne Crouton. I couldn't hold my laugh in. I'm like, I'm the bad student who's either zoning out or giggling.
Hey, it's not serious. I mean, it is, but you don't have to be. Some shit like that, right? I said that once. Someone wise said that once.
You've said it 100 times, Tara.
Beep. Okay, so we got our DNA, right? Let's zoom back out to this small freaking molecular DNA here. Your DNA is genetic information that's encoded, a blueprint, as we've said many times, that's genetically imprinted, passed down from generation to generation. It's going to have instructions for development, function, reproduction. So it really is the basis for how we receive information and stimuli and then how we respond to it. So we have these 12 strands of DNA. The first two are the ones that are most commonly talked about. Those are our genes. That's where we get our eye color, our hair color, all that nonsense that gets passed down from our lineage. The other strands of DNA are what are deemed as junk DNA. That's because for a long time they had no idea what the hell it was used for. Now we know it's more for like regulation of gene expression, and gene expression is just, insulin production, how our muscles contract, just all of those systems that run through our body and how it's regulated. So we're going to look at those two main first, those gene DNAs. And I think something that's important to reference is epigenetics. Basically, the inherited genes that get passed down. So your DNA structure is going to stay the same, but the genes and the expression of those genes through epigenetics might change a little bit. And that is affected by your external environment. So if you're facing trauma and you're not healing from that trauma, or anxiety or depression, you're not tending to that, it literally changes the epigenetics of your DNA. And if not addressed your entire lifetime, can then be passed down to your children. That is literally ancestral trauma being passed down to you, and you will have anxiety and depression for you have no idea why. They've done many studies with descendants from Holocaust survivors and how that epigenetics still plays generations down the line with anxiety and other mental health problems. So just as we know that trauma and negative effects can happen on our epigenetic or our genes, so can positive external factors, right? So they've looked at things like diet, exercise, meditation, yoga, breathing techniques, and they literally change your physiological makeup for stress hormones, for your immune system, for blood pressure. All of those can find harmony or can find peace when you in your mind find peace. So we're already seeing scientifically this connection to brain and body. And when we can sit in that mindset of gratitude or acceptance, we're literally telling our body that it is okay, right? We can have better gene expression. So then I kind of looked a little bit deeper and I was like, well, is there any scientific evidence that is supporting this idea that we can change our bodies and heal our bodies with our mind? And the answer is yes. But because there is no mathematical formula that links the two that we know of at this very moment, they don't want to deem it as scientifically sound. But we see things like placebos, right? We've seen improvement in our health because we think that we're taking things that will improve our health, or hypnosis that cures addiction or chronic illness. So we see how playing with the mind can physically alter the body. And two sources before I get into the electron that I would love to share if you're more interested in how the body stores trauma and how the mind can heal that trauma would be The Body Keeps the Score, which I'm sure everybody knows this freaking book because it's fantastic, and You Are the Placebo, both written by doctors about how our emotional environment and social environment affects the body and how the mind can heal that. What's going on? What?
I feel like I was just holding in laughter and I can't stop. The commentary just going on in my head is cracking me
Because
up.
they're like, why are you talking about science? You're not here to talk about science. And I'm like, I know, but let me just, that's why I'm like speeding through. I'm like, let me just fucking tell them what an electron is, okay? Then I'll be done. I swear. Okay. But I'm not a scientist to explain science. But something that I thought was really interesting was learning about electrons' energy. I definitely have talked about electrons even as a teacher, but the concept that electrons can be in either a grounded state, which means it's at its lowest level of frequency, which reminds me of like the frequency of the earth being a low vibration. It's its most stable, and that's when it's its closest to the center of the atom. So it's like really like low energy, not necessarily a bad thing because it's super stable, super grounded, and it can absorb energy through light or heat information, and it can also release energy through light and heat. And through this dance, it literally goes to like higher levels of energy and is like super, they call it an excited state because it's got like, woo, it's like bouncing all over the place. It's like freaking crazy. And then it's like, here's energy over there. And then it can like ground itself down. So it literally reminded me of energy exchange, what we talk about all the time, right? I have all this light and information. Let me share it with you and I can ground myself back down. But then I also need to get that back so we can be in this cycle. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Freaking love electrons. Thank you for doing that. And how do they play with DNA, you ask? Why the fuck am I even talking about electrons, you ask? Because they're crucial to the makeup of DNA, right? Because they're literally an atom, which makes up everything. And the structure of DNA is based on a series of these chemical bonds between atoms, which involves the sharing of these electrons, the transferring of this energy from one to another, right? And that's what gives DNA its unique shape and property. Can we take a deep breath together? I'm done with science.
You did a great job explaining. I feel like I'm back in 9th grade.
Yeah.
Still zoning out.
I know, right? So the overall concept is DNA provides a blueprint for all these processes that occur within the body that help for fundamental growth, development, and health. So that's why we want to look at our spiritual DNA, right? Because that is the blueprint of our spiritual body that processes the energy within the body and plays a huge role in our growth and development and health, but not just in this body, across all of our parallel lifetimes.
We're getting real meta here. The way I'm kind of visualizing it is having a spectrum of spirituality on one side, science on the other, and in the center is the human experience. So I almost feel called for us to talk about it from the human experience because we all know what that's about. We're all experiencing it. So, what you're saying is really kind of making me jump back to the relationships episode in who we share our bodies with. So, genetically, if you're swapping spit with someone, or even further, having their DNA come inside of you, I feel like actually, science has shown that I don't know if it's sperm or semen. I actually don't know the difference, just like men don't know the difference between a vagina and a vulva. But
Wait, hold on. Is there a difference between sperm and semen?
one is like the carrier of, like, semen, I think, is like the load, and I think sperm is the individual swimmer.
Okay. Welcome to Frequency Broads, where we just discovered that health and biology in high school did none of us any good.
Anyways, it has been shown that sperm or semen travels up into the brain. So if you've had someone ejaculate inside of you, and I think this could go for both men and women, it ends up in your brain.
That's crazy. I did not know that. After all this freaking research I did, nobody told me that. But that's crazy, right? Because we know that like our DNA literally lives in our egg and our sperm. And that DNA is going to your brain and literally, hello.
But furthermore, I mean, our DNA lives in the air we breathe, in our spit, in our blood. Like, of course, I'm like thinking bodily fluids right now, but even being, I guess, when we think about electrons in the quantum realm, just being in the same space as someone is affecting your DNA. Not as significantly as exchanging of fluids, but I think that's why there's been some kind of backlash on group spiritual healing experiences, because some folks will take on the the trauma and pain of another, and that's why it's really important to prepare and educate yourself, be discerning, and understand what's yours, what's not yours.
But that's crazy. And I think you're so right about spiritual healing groups. I've definitely been a part of shamanic journeys with many people, or, group meditations and journeys like that, or even like classes that I'm in with multiple people. And thank God that I'm able to discern what's mine and what's not, which took a very long time to recognize what is my energy and what is not.
Mhm.
But yeah, you really do tap into other people and you start to have this collective experience, which on one hand could be something beautiful that you can all work
It
through.
is.
But if you're not knowledgeable of that, you're then in your mind, like in that brain, like, where did this trauma come from? Where did this feeling come from? And you start to try to analyze something that isn't yours, and it's hard to make sense of.
And maybe it's a good point in not needing to analyze everything, but just acknowledging what is. I am experiencing grief right now. Great. Here are the ways you tend to grief. And if it keeps showing up, then perhaps there's a requirement to analyze to some degree. But I'm like all for leaving the mind out of this. Like, let's
I
just give the
know.
mind a break. Well, I really do feel like the mind is used to access different portals. The mind is used to operate in this human experience, to be this kind of equilibrium. The mind also, I feel, holds the ego along with the solar plexus. I don't know why I went here. I meant here where you can't see.
Well, that's something you definitely taught me, because I have always been a person that's in the mind. And as we know, I've like studied my cycles and I'm always thinking about, where does this come from? And I don't I'm I'm able to discern when I need to step away from that, so it doesn't seem to be hindering me. It does allow me to see, like, is this past lineage trauma? Is this consciousness trauma? Is this my partner's trauma? And I'm able to kind of assess that, but I do see how people can go a little too deep. So I'm glad that you bring that balance to me, even because I do tend to like be very analytical with my emotions and where they come from. And it's taught me a lot, and it's made me be able to heal from a lot of trauma from this lifetime and other lifetimes. But there are also just times where I'm like, I'm feeling this and I just have to feel it and then let it go.
It passes much faster when it doesn't linger in the mind.
Absolutely.
And we love you for your analytical nature. It's actually a beautiful gift to witness you be able to articulate your emotions and process them in a way that feels very scientific.
It does. I always say that my spiritual practice is very data driven. I'm always like taking data on myself and taking data on like the sign. And that's why I'm always like writing things down so I don't forget it. And it works for me. But I see that that doesn't work for you. For you, it's about, not that you never do that, but it's about just every time I ask you questions about like, this came through, you're like, why do you need to know, Tara? And I'm like, you're so right, but also I need to know. I need to know. Well, as we're talking about getting out of the mind, let's really get the hell out of the mind and start talking about spiritual DNA. Victoria, what the hell is spiritual DNA?
I have no idea. Just kidding.
LOL.
Well, I really don't see a difference between science and spiritual DNA. I do get that there is a difference, but to me, it's all one.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess if I'm looking at it from a higher level perspective, spiritual DNA has a lot to do with the light body and light codes and being able to have power over our DNA, because I am a firm believer that, yes, we were born with this ancestral trauma, but we can always heal from it. We can always stop it in its tracks by either not carrying on the genetic lineage of this trauma, um, or realizing that part of the reason why you're here and this could be part of your life purpose is to heal this trauma. Because I'm a firm believer that we chose our parents and we knew what we were getting ourselves into, which is really hard to accept when you've had shitty parents, parents who weren't there, parents who I think created more stress than the things parents are supposed to give you. Um, so I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to make light of anyone who had a terrible upbringing or parental figures. But that's part of our journey, and I'm sure you're in a much better place. If you're this far along in this episode, you're probably in a much better place.
But I agree. I agree absolutely. DNA and spiritual DNA, it's all the freaking same, right? It's just we're differentiating with the word spiritual DNA just to like shift out of the mind a little bit. But I think you're right in the concept of us choosing the vessel in which we live in, right? So we know that we're getting a very specific genetic blueprint in the carbon base that we live in right now, as well as a very specific light genetic background that we're communing when we step into this vessel. So you have a medicine that comes from your ancestors, your lineage, your culture, and you have this medicine that comes from the galaxy. And when you commune them together, that's your unique light code. That's your unique medicine. So when you choose this vessel, however hard it may be, and like Victoria said, we're not taking away from that. It just means that you have such potent medicine because you very specifically chose this vessel.
I think it's important to realize all of the ways that our DNA is influenced from our food, pesticides, herbicides, our soil having the minerals and nutrients removed in the states, from even our water, basically everything that's elemental that we consume in some way, either in the quantum field or physically. So let's go into the topic of light body activations, which I think if you're to like even type into YouTube like DNA light code, or it's always something followed by activation or upgrade or and what exactly is that?
What I have gathered through my resources and understanding and downloads myself is that we have, like Victoria said, this light encoded DNA that is literally one and the same with our carbon based DNA. It is surrounding it. And it's through your free will choice to choose to activate it, right? I do see when I YouTube like shit like that, it'll give me like certain hertz to help me activate that, right? Certain music, which is helpful, similar to the other tools we've talked about, like crystals and herbs and things like that. But ultimately, you need to choose and make that verbal or written or however you're going to set that into motion that I want to activate my DNA. And what that truly means is reprogramming the carbon based DNA to have something beyond reproduction, because most of the carbon based DNA on Earth is in order for us to adapt to our environment and then reproduce and continue to live long and prosper. You know what I mean? So when we step away from that and say, I want to evolve, I want to heal my trauma, I want to help others heal, I want to raise my frequency, that's all a free will choice to activate the DNA and choose a new programming system. And that programming system, when activated, allows you to walk in full communion with your higher self at like a decision by decision, moment by moment basis. So there will be no more, I need to sit in meditation and ask. Sometimes for bigger questions, we may sit and do that, but it will literally be a superhighway streaming this information into your body when you've been able to access all these different parts of your DNA.
Computers are a really great example of what this actually looks like inside of us. They are codes. Our DNA is made up of codes, similar to computers.
Mm-hmm.
And we hold the power to program and or reprogram these codes. How does one begin to reprogram their code?
Well, like I said, it first comes with commanding it to activate, not in a necessarily like angry way, like I command you to activate, but just being like, I am ready to let go of this programming that has existed in my lineage, in my culture, in my family, in society, and step into full resonance with myself so that way I can actively receive clear downloads of information that resonates, share my medicine, heal my body, mind, spirit, all that kind of stuff. And it starts with you choosing to do so. So that's all of the 9 episodes before, choosing to release what no longer serves you, choosing to separate yourself from labels that were put on you, choosing relationships that are aligned with who you want to be, right? It's making those free will choices. How would you activate it, Victoria?
Well, I think before you even get to the point of commanding it, I think there are a few things that will likely happen when you reach the point where it's time to reprogram. And this often looks like hitting some sort of like repeated resistance in your
Mm,
life, like a relationship that's past its expiration date. You're in a constant state of conflict. You know when it's time to let something go. And some of the hardest things we have to do as humans is let go of people, of things, of places. Um, but I would say you're met with a great deal of resistance. I think another way you could see it show up is through weight gain. I briefly mentioned this during last episode, and I think weight gain, especially kind of out of nowhere, or it just keeps happening, even though you feel like you're doing better, you're doing all the right things, you're eating well, you're exercising, but there's the emotional component to weight loss that I think more and more people are realizing. Yeah, so I think the weight gain is just symbolic of something isn't working and you need to tune into your body and start to reprogram in some way. And our thoughts, I think, there's kind of this fine line between spiritual bypassing and positive thinking. And I think it can get a little sticky sometimes, especially when people are in maybe a state of resistance or they don't really resonate with positive thinking. And for me personally, when I've gone through these periods of my life where I just seem to be very inflamed, like I'm retaining water, like I'm sensitive to everything I eat, like nothing sits well in my stomach. Um, you know, I've mentioned before I love me a good colonic. Huge fan. Not only does it remove waste, but it hydrates you as well. But I think the important thing or the point I'm trying to get to is that the water molecules in our body, because we were like 70, 80, 90, whatever, we're a huge percentage of water. Going back to the whole idea of positive thinking, those thoughts are influencing us and our water molecules. And in times where I've been very stressed, and I think high cortisol levels also contribute to this. But there's a scientist who put words on jars, some positive, some negative, and like let them sit for a month or however long. And the jars with negative words or kind of self deprecating words, the water turned really kind of muddy and chaotic looking. And the ones with positive, loving words formed these like beautiful, crystalline, complex, kind of mandala type shapes. So it just goes to show that our water in our bodies is being influenced by our mind. All of this is so simple. And it's like our mind, here we go again with the mind, tries to overcomplicate things, tries to actually steer us away from our true self. In a lot of times, not always. The mind love you sometimes, but
Well, I'm glad you brought up. There's a couple things there that have been coming to me over the past couple weeks. Water and positive thinking. First of all, you're right about water retention. Water is what helps us store memory in our cells. So if you're gaining that weight, think about what memories and energies are being stored within that hydration of the cell. And if it's something that needs to be released and you're not looking at it, being able to tend to it, transmute that energy, then you're going to hold on to all that water. But on the opposite end, when you're gaining new downloads, when you're activating, it's super important to stay hydrated because the cells need to hold that water for memory as well as like just being healthy in general. And something that's been coming up a lot with the students that I work with is I feel that as the consciousness is shifting into this state of healing and we want to heal generational trauma and we want to learn from, the cycles that we see through generations in our families, and we don't want to sometimes be like our parents in certain aspects, is there's a lot of parents or just people in general who are trying to teach their children or their friends or their partners this concept of gratitude and positive thinking. And yes, this could be super, super beneficial. We know that it is. Literally talked about it with epigenetics, right? It's so important to have that acceptance and gratitude and compassion for ourselves. But what they're doing is they're bypassing the actual feelings. And people are being left with their feelings unvalidated because we're saying, oh, if you're feeling this way, let's focus on what we should be grateful for. Or let's try to find the positive. And that's something that I do teach my students, a perspective switch. However, these coping mechanisms happen after we have sat in the feeling and then let it go through our coping mechanisms. Like Victoria was saying, we don't always need to analyze it, but as soon as we feel anxiety or fear or sadness, to then use a coping mechanism right away, you're not listening to what that emotion is trying to tell you. You're not trying to, not that you need to go deep into where it came from or why, but just like, are you telling me that something's not right here? Right? There's the discernment.
it kind of does relate back to DNA or ancestral trauma because it's perpetuating us not being able to express our emotions. And I think in a lot of cultures, you're not permitted to cry. And for me personally, I experienced this on one side of my family where it's like kind of disrespectful because it upsets people to see you show emotion that is anything other than happy. Even happiness is kind of frowned upon in some cultures, which is wild to me.
Well, we know that positive thinking definitely affects our epigenetics. We see that and it passes down. So let's come back to that light encoded DNA. When we're looking at our light code DNA, that's usually depicted in geometric shapes because it shows us how the energy is flowing. That's why we use things like sacred geometry. And there is an amazing quote. Here's another resource by the Sophia Code, which is literally all about DNA activation. And it says, the light encoded DNA is designed to accelerate your emotional, mental, and physical ascension in progressive steps of radical transformation, quantum self realization, and embodied self mastery. When activated, you will experience accelerated releases of social conditioned belief systems and viral programming that have discredited your innocent divine nature. It progressively overrides and transmutes your inherited ancestral belief patterns, traumatic cellular imprints, your projected self limitations, vows and oaths from other lifetimes, and collected fears of humanity consciousness that is stored in your carbon based DNA. So it really, that's like a really wordy way to say, like, pretty much stripping all of the shit that has been placed on you to come back to your true divine nature, that sovereignty, not only for this lifetime, but for other lifetimes. Like, I know Victoria knows this story, but when I started doing this DNA activation, something, and I might have mentioned this on the podcast, but something that came up was a trauma not from this lifetime, but from another where my children had perished in a fire. And I needed to transmute that energy because that version of me was not capable of doing so in her grief. To transmute that energy and say, you are held, you're okay, it's not your fault, you know, all this stuff, yada, yada. That's because I'm activating that light code DNA and I'm able to then access not only deprogramming the patterns of this life, but the limitations and oaths and traumatic cellular imprints of other lifetimes. And it is a lot of work, but when you clear out the junk that is in your DNA or that programming, then you create room to download new beliefs and information. So that way you can celebrate your authenticity and you're allowed to follow that genetic blueprint or medicine or light code within yourself to share that with others. And by sharing that with others, like Victoria said, it ripples out. People can feel that. Beings can feel that. Humans sometimes are a little bit more in the brain and can't notice that, but you'll start to notice that animals interact with you differently and plants interact with you differently. And beings who are ready to wake up, their light code, their DNA gets pinged and says, "What? Hold on. There is some light shining from somebody else's DNA right now. And that's reminding me that I can shine too." It gives you that reminder, that ping intuition. You then have the free will choice to choose to activate that.
Or the opposite could happen where the light is just so blinding to the person and they're not ready. They're not at the point in their evolution where they're ready to receive that light code energy just from being in your presence. And that's why friends will fall out of your vicinity because there's just no longer resonance. So, Tara, one thing that you mentioned was the unraveling of this junk DNA or clearing out of the junk DNA to make room for new DNA or information. And I'd like to clarify that it may not necessarily be new information. It could be information that's existed all along. It's just that your body and your light body specifically is able to receive and interpret this light code in a way that you just weren't able to before.
But I'm so glad you said that because all of this information that we're talking about, all of these downloads, it's a remembrance. So I'm glad you clarified that. It's not new information. It's just maybe new for your waking mind to begin to comprehend. And then you have to tell yourself, hold on, brain, we're not going to fully comprehend this. So let's just experience it and kind of see what feels right and what doesn't. But it is long history of galactic information that is literally stored in your being because you are a galactic being.
And I think this is a prime example of what the saying, everything you need to know is already inside of you. That's what this means.
Mm-hmm. So, can I ask you, Victoria? We've touched upon DNA a little bit. Why did I have to touch on electron? You want to share about electron? The electron?
Well, within your DNA, the electrons are ultimately the first embodiment of your light being. So, all of your incarnations are connected through this electron, and it sends out a broadcast with your higher self, kind of as the antenna. Um, well, it's more like your body's the antenna, and your higher self is who you're kind of tuning into. But then your higher self, I see, takes you to certain channels and frequencies and planets and information that, I mean, you can ultimately access almost anything. Um, so just saying that actually took me back to this reoccurring dream I've had all my life where I am near a body of water and I'm trying to cross the body of water, and either the bridge has collapsed or the pieces that leads to wherever the next side is just inaccessible. I can't like get my body to move to that next phase,
Mm-hmm.
or my car just can't even get a jump start. I'm often in a car trying to like jump over water to reach like the next part of the bridge. And so when I say that you can access anything through this antenna, there really is a time in which your higher self knows when you're ready to get to that next phase or that next part of your evolution. And it's a form of protection because even thinking back or having the remembrance of some of our past lives can be very disturbing. And I had a very clear memory play out of a past life with someone I know in this lifetime. And it felt like a movie, and it shook me to my very core and made me realize and feel very grateful that we do not remember all of our lifetimes. We do not remember all of our traumas. We do not need to know the specifics of our trauma, just the fact that the trauma exists.
Mm.
If we did, our brains would explode, our bodies would implode. That's not part of the human experience. And it's
Absolutely.
for the better.
Absolutely. Like she's saying, this electron is what connects you energetically to these other incarnations of yourself. But man, oh man, if I had to experience this other version of me losing their children in this fire, that would be a whole nother situation than me just talking to that other version of me to be like, let's transmute this grief. You're 1,000% right. We have separation for that reason because there's so much that we need to transmute and choose with our free will amongst many incarnations. And if we had to do that simultaneously, what a freaking overload.
And if this memory or if a memory appears, feel free to ask, what are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to show me? I'm not here to relive this.
Absolutely. And I think it goes with everything we're talking about today. You need to make that what I believe should be a verbal choice, whether it's in your head verbally or spoken out loud is stronger to say, I constantly just use the words show me when a new guide comes in or a path or parallel life is trying. Show me. What are you trying to show me? I don't need to see the whole trauma. Just what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to show me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think another thing to note is these 12 strands of DNA are linked to the 12 chakras. They are the 12 portals that access these parallel lives, your higher self, other light beings, right? If we're talking about you're a light being, that means that you have ancestral information coming from Earth and your lineage, but you have ancestral information and lifetimes that you're having on other planets. And I know we've talked about this in another episode, maybe Cycles in Time, when we talked about shifting into dimensions, but there's so much galactic information that is stored within your DNA. And something that I've been practicing and have been taught is that when you can start to access this DNA, this knowledge, the way that I was taught to visualize it is that, the helix has like that ladder look, that those are books of information. And when you can reorganize those books through sacred geometry, through however you're going to see it and visualize it and access that, you're accessing this galactic and earth library that lives within yourself. And when I can organize those books, right, we live on this consciousness together. We can access all this information. If I can organize those books because they've been chaotic over, Earth's ascension itself, then I organize that for the next person who then activates and can tune into that information a little bit easier.
And I could hear maybe some people ask, what? How? Other people? Is it through you having children? And I think it's important to clarify that it's not necessarily through you passing on your genetics, but it's more the ripple effect of you having the courage, you doing the work. I'm almost getting this visual of so many lights turning on Earth, like our light DNA bodies being activated. Like we're all waking up in the morning at the same time, flicking on our lights. And, it almost seems like the more that the lights come on inside of us, the more others will feel encouraged and inspired to turn on theirs. And I think part of the reason why so many people, including myself, have felt hesitant to kind of unravel DNA is because we're afraid of our own power, because we are so incredibly powerful. And our power has been diminished over millennia because we weren't necessarily meant to know who we are, because we live on a free will world. And let me take you back through a galactic history lesson where Earth was and still is fought over for control and power, even though the rule of the land is free will. But the original, let's call it World War I or Galactic World War I for planet Earth, was won by entities who don't want us to be in our power, who are still acting out ways to control us, ways to distract us. That's a huge one. I know we've talked about this time and time again. Are y'all sick of hearing me talk about my celibacy? And will I reveal to the viewers when I am no longer celibate? Stay tuned. But going back to our history lesson here, and I know I mentioned in the last episode that we are in the spiritual war. It's because us light beings are back and we're taking over. That's why we've seen a rise in rainbow children or indigo children, and the first, second, third wave of us light beings, our light workers. We're here to take back this earth, and there are so many different, and as you mentioned earlier, Tara, galactic beings that comprise who we are in our DNA beyond our human form. And I'm here to say the light has won. We've already won. And I'm sorry we have to stick around and watch the powers that think they still be enact the most heinous crimes against people that do not deserve to experience I think it's really tough to be an empath and light worker and witness these heinous acts unfold because it is yet another form of distraction from our power. And while it's important to grieve and acknowledge what's happening around us, the way to take back control, and it's not even necessarily about control, it's about enacting free will. It's to be in control of our DNA, not control of the external world. And when we control our DNA, we actually ultimately control the external world.
I think that's really important to note. And I think that's why, like we were saying last time, that there's been oppression and whitewashing of so many cultures, because when we talk about the vessel you choose and the medicine in which your carbon-based DNA holds, people of color and indigenous people, they hold such powerful medicine in their carbon-based DNA. And these entities knew that and chose to specifically oppress those people because of the power that they hold. Yes, we all hold such beautiful power, but all unique. And their unique power was to bring change to this world and to bring us back to the remembrance. And they were stripped of that. But something that I want to make note of is, just as we've now come to, especially in America, that we're this melting pot of many, genetic lineages. That's why people use ancestry.com or 23andMe and whatever, because we're trying to figure out where our DNA is coming from. Our galactic DNA is not just one thing, not always. So when we talk about these different areas in our universe, places that we can come from, or beings that we have genetic DNA represented in our own light codes, like Pleiadians, Arcturians, Lumerians, Reptilian, some of them have maybe not the best track record, for lack of a better word, but when we think about us being a part of that, that does not mean that you are holding such a negative, poor choice. You need to understand that that's where your history came from, just as much as, where our physical history of oppression might have come from in our lineage here. But that doesn't mean that you are going to represent that, right? Our light code DNA is wrapped around our carbon-based DNA and has the medicine to heal the traumas that we've experienced and may have perpetuated. So that's why we want to look at ourselves as a whole and unique DNA holder of this light code information, and know that I may be part Lumerian and part reptilian and part Pleiadian, and all of those are each holding their own frequencies that make a unique light code within myself. And we don't want to judge or shame or feel guilt for those parts of our DNA, but we need to then tend to those and find the medicine within it to heal that for our physical body, but also the lineage and other lifetimes that that star seed gene is coming from.
Tara, I'm so glad you mentioned the other lifetimes because, as you've mentioned before, they are all existing at the same time. And it makes me wonder what it is like to go back and talk to myself in another lifetime or even in this lifetime. And that's something I think a lot of people have been practicing in whatever form of meditation you want to call it. But so going back to your child self and giving that child in you the love that he or she or they need, similarly, you can do with yourself in other lifetimes.
Mm-hmm. And know that we've spoke about how time is not linear. So if there was one light group, or the Syrians or whoever who came in and maybe did something, or the reptilians who did something that weren't, I don't know, up to code, for lack of a better word, you doing that DNA activation affects past, present, and future. If we all sit and find the light and love within these codes and start to transmute them and use them as medicine, we can affect both past, present, or all past, present, and future, which is really, again, why we're saying get out of the mind, because that makes no sense, right? How and what am I doing now affecting the past that will affect the future? That makes literal no logical sense. But that's why we're saying we really want you to understand that it's not happening here. And just even if you just got to take a deep breath and be like, I don't know what the hell these two broads are talking about, but I'm just going to let my light being hear it and feel validated and heard and know that maybe it's my time to start waking up.
The beings that we're talking about are all operating on different agendas. And I think one way I've always looked at it is that Pleiadians, Lemurians, um, Octurians, they love to feed off of love. They love love. They love joy. They love, especially the Pleiadians. Tara and I are both very connected with the Pleiadians. They want us to be in joy, in our sovereignty, experiencing life to its fullest and the good, the bad, the ugly, but ultimately returning to our divine right to experience pleasure and happiness. There are other beings that feed off of fear. And so when you find yourself in a state of fear, please know who you are feeding. And not necessarily that you are feeding, but you are feeding the agenda of the oppressor when you are in a state of fear. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing that full circle to say that one of the best ways, or no, one of the best ways to combat control over us is to live in joy and to live in love. I think we're all annoyed by hearing light and love at this point, but it's true. That's what it's all about, light and love. And hopefully, what we've talked about today gives you a new perspective on that light. We all know love, but that light piece,
That
that
information.
information.
The Pleiadians are also very adamant in sharing that humans as a species are on an evolutionary track. And I'm not even talking just physically speaking. The point of what they're trying to say is yes, there are entities that are here that are feeding off of fear, but we cannot face them with judgment because they are also in the process of their evolution and will soon come to a phase where they recognize that the love frequency is what evolves us. The fear frequency is what keeps us dormant and asleep, not just the people that they're trying to instill in fear, but their own evolution as well. And I think that's what they wanted us to clarify is that yeah, there are entities that maybe don't have our best interests, but protect yourself. I'm not saying don't, but don't cast judgment for their bad or their this or that. Just know that they're going through their own evolution. Like we talk about relationship villains, right? If we cast shame as opposed to just what are they trying to show me, people who are casting fear on us are trying to show you that you have the power and you don't have to give in to fear.
Mic drop. I've said a couple of times that Earth is this happening place. It's a school. It's where we come to enact um, our light bodies in human form. It sounds not as sexy as it actually is, right? But there is something called the living library. This is what the Pleiadians call the living library. And it's essentially like a library, like you would picture going in. And like Tara had mentioned before, your DNA holds kind of the books or the information within this living library. And once upon a time, the information was stored and is still stored in the plants, the trees, all the things. And then when humans became humans, the information was stored within us. But this living library and the key codes held within us is all part of why we're here. And here's the fact of the matter, our genetics have been messed with for since the beginning of time, since the beginning humans existed. And not to say that's good or bad, but I think we're here to say that it's you who ultimately has control over your genetics at this point in the game. So have fun with it. Start to unravel, start to play, start to see those synchronicities, start to move your body in a way where you snap, crackle, and pop and unlock a memory, and it completely shatters your view of reality. Um, you know, you know?
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. Because when you activate that DNA, you're right. Synchronicities after synchronicities after synchronicities, things like angel numbers, your manifestations happen quickly. You start to realize that you are literally creating the reality you want. And I am still shocked by this every day. I'm like, I can't believe that this is my reality. That all the things that I felt my soul desired or needed to feel sustained and healthy, I'm literally it's here. It was like that easy, like a blink of an eye. Why? Because it's been so long that I've been working on this activation of my DNA, unraveling, getting to the living library. Right? Victoria mentions it's not just passing this information down to your children. The living library is a consciousness well that we can all access. This knowledge of this well of knowledge that we all have access to is right at our fingertips. You just need to choose, make that free will choice and say, I'm ready. I'm ready for this. And it's sometimes a little overwhelming, but I'm ready for it. So I know for me, the way that I get started or the way to connect with that energetic library, that galactic library, is you can start to play around with who is giving you guidance, because sometimes it's your higher self, but sometimes it's your guide group. You know, I have many different entities in my guide group, and it's about saying, okay, just like I would have a spiritual mentor here on earth, I'm going to ask one of them to mentor me, and I'm going to really tune into them however you decide to do that. Cards, meditation, journaling, we've been through all that before. However you want to get to them, just ask them. I invite them in. They're waiting, just like your DNA is dormant, waiting for you to say, I'm ready, activate me. Like they're sitting there like eagerly little puppies, like, are you ready for me? Have you noticed me yet? I'm over here. Hello. I dropped this synchronicity for you. I gave you this sign. Hey, do you remember when you had that dream? That was me. Like they're just waiting for you to be like, hey, I'm inviting in, and you don't even know their name or where they're from. I'm inviting in my ancestors galactically. I'm inviting in my guide group. Can you give me the one guide that I really need to work with right now? They know the spiel. They'll give it to you, right? Learn about different star systems and sit with that information and see what resonates with you. Or go into that inner heart temple and say, show me the electron so I can connect with the other versions of me. Right? You can begin to channel. That's what Victoria and I do on this podcast through our daily life, is we are channeling information. And I don't know if I've ever actually shared how I get my information, but talk about being out of the mind. This makes no literal sense. And please excuse me if I explained this already. But the way that I receive it, okay, Victoria's heard this story a million times, but I'm going to tell you guys, okay? You know that episode of SpongeBob, and if you don't, I'm going to explain it, where he has to do a fancy restaurant and he's like remembering all the things on how to be fancy, and he forgets his name, and all the little SpongeBobs are in his brain going through the files like, gotta find a name, gotta find a name, gotta find a name. All of that information for me is files. And all of a sudden, right, it's not hearing. Like my mom is a medium and she's like, I'm on the phone and I hear what they tell me. For me, it's like the file has been dropped open and I just have this memory already. I'm not seeing the memory, I'm not experiencing it, but it's already a memory, or it's already information that I know. And that is something that's really hard to trust. So it takes a lot of compassion and time to say, yeah, I am trusting what's coming through. And the more that you trust, the more you get that validation through synchronicities. And I say, oh shit, I did get that. And now it's in this book. And now my teacher said it. And now Victoria said it. So just play around, ask them to come in. Over there is a fucking party. Like Victoria said, they want you to live in joy and love. And every time I channel, they are always playing some kind of joke or being humorous or like rallying on the other side, partying. Like every time someone does good and I'm giving them a reading, their guide group is literally like, yeah, we did it. And everyone's like, are they literally like, no, they're literally like round of applause, clapping for you. Like they're here for you. So just ask them. Just as much as you want to learn your lineage here, do it. Yes, do it. But also just ask them, be like, who the fuck am I? Where am I going? What's going on?
I'm glad they're having a good time. I was actually just picturing you as a guide or an angel, which I think we are angels in human form, but you just being super impatient and just like, why didn't you get my sign or my message? But that's actually not how you would be in guide or angel form. So just like,
Well, I will say sometimes they get a little snippy, some of them, you know? It really depends. Angels not so much. The angel realm is not very snippy, but sometimes like the Arcturians and them, they get a little well, sorry, we've been telling you. Like what nothing else we could do. You know, like they get a little snippy sometimes.
yeah,
Rightfully so.
yeah,
When we keep asking for the bigger billboard and we're like, that's not good enough. Give me another sign. They're like, oh, Jesus Christ. Do you know how much energy it takes us to manifest something on earth? Come on.
yeah. Information will drop down once for me, and I will get an additional ping if I don't take note. And I've had to train myself to listen the first time. It has
Mm.
not been easy because I think we've all ignored our intuition many a times. Um, and I think I found out through life lessons of the like, oh, I should have listened to my intuition. And that happening time and time again, where I started to get the clear messages and know when it was my higher self or my guides telling me, "Hey, here's what's up." One way I started to channel was through loved ones coming through me. And it was very startling at first because I was very taken aback when someone, and I'll give an example. I had a very close friend who lost a girlfriend, and she would tell me, "Oh my gosh, you sound just like her. You have the same laugh." She would make a joke like that, or I'd even reference something that I had no idea what I was even talking about. It just kind of came through like either a song or some sort of reference, right? And um my ego had a really hard time wrapping my head around, no, this is me. This is who I am. This is me speaking through. But then it happened so many times after that that I had to fully release who I thought I was or me showing up as my whole self and realize that it was a gift I was giving these people who, I was accessing their loved ones or their loved ones were accessing me. And I think having those moments of a remembrance of an energy of a loved one who's no longer on earth is one of the greatest gifts I could ever give someone. And so now when it happens, I'm like, yes, cool. But I really feel like the part of me that's me steps aside and my vessel allows this spirit to come through and act through me. So sometimes when I'm really funny, it's not even me. That was me, but thanks for laughing.
Oh, but that's beautiful that you're able to give that gift to people. I know that feeling,
Thank
and
you.
it is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. And I also will receive visual signs. And I think, Tara, you've had similar experiences where your guides and you kind of have an agreement of this symbol, whether, I think the common one are butterflies. I think a symbol for Tara and I that we've probably talked about so many times and have not given any context to are crows. Our crow friends,
Mhm.
I think, are deliverers of messages, and part of drafting up what Frequency Broads was going to be and the topics we're going to discuss, I think were activated by all of the crows who like to hang outside of my window. So thanks, crows.
Absolutely. Crows are messengers for sure, to the point where like I hear a caw And I'm like, okay, let me focus on like what just came to mind. And then I'm like, okay. And I don't do anything about it. I don't say anything about it because it's, I'm walking to work or something. So it's in the back of my mind. And it's like, "Gah, gah, gah." And I literally have to say out loud, talk about like commanding, right? I'd say like, yes, I hear you. And then they stop and they fly away. I'm like, okay, that was it. I just needed to tell you, yes, I'm paying attention. I hear you. I stored it in the back of my brain. I got to go in and teach now. Thank you. Goodbye.
This is another great example of our mind stepping in and saying, what does this mean? How do I, and overanalyzing. I think when you channel, there's this part of you that has to totally surrender and let go of what you think you know. I was going to try to rhyme, but I don't have
What
any
you
cat in the hat tricks like you did last
Okay,
episode.
that was
It
really
was
good.
good.
I'm sorry.
The
That was
cat,
so
the
good.
rat. Thoroughly enjoyed
Mm,
that.
mm. Gotta let go of what you know.
Before you go, because we're only here for a short amount of time. Let's savor this
Hey,
beautiful
absolutely.
experience.
Whew. Well, what a lot of information that we just dumped out. The Pleiadians are happy. The Arcturians are happy. Lumerians are happy. They've been here today. Um, I'm happy. Are you happy,
I'm
Victoria?
happy. I'm very happy.
People, are you happy? It's our 10th episode. So we enjoy. Do we enjoy? I guess so. We enjoy your presence. I meant to say we appreciate your presence, but we enjoy it as well because although we're not talking with you at the table, we feel your energy. We know you're with us, and we appreciate that you've been on this ride with us this whole time.
And none of the information we've shared in any of these episodes are time sensitive. So please feel free to come back. We don't recommend binging these episodes, it's a lot of information. It is a transmission of energy. So while you may not be able to kind of keep up and digest through your mind, your light body is receiving this information and remembering. So be patient with yourself, drink lots of water, rest, rest, rest. And let me eat my own
Mm-hmm.
words as I say it. um, and we just want to give a huge thank you and shout out to people who have been sticking along for each episode, who tune in every Thursday, who give us feedback. We're really, really grateful to hear how this information is sitting. Big shout out to my mom, who for the first couple of episodes would give me like a book report in an email, either the day of or on Fridays. And, I think it's a really beautiful example, Mom, of showing up and doing the work. It's not easy. And part of my reason for starting Frequency Broads was to provide this information that's not easy to have in a conversation, or like it's just not, this is not light stuff. Um so part of me wanted to share my knowledge through this platform, and I'm really happy that it's resonating with you.
And we hope that it resonates with all of you. And just like Victoria's mom, take the time to sit with the information. How does it make you feel? What questions does it arise? Because we want to hear from you. We want to know what questions you have so we can clarify some information that came through or expand on certain topics. So, as we take this rest and time to reflect and retreat for ourselves, we invite you to take a moment and sit with this information and share with us what resonates with you. And we look forward to coming back for season 2. We have some fun, exciting, new things going on, and we can't wait to share them with you.
So we will be returning on June 1st. Stay tuned on either our YouTube or Instagram. We'll put out some content just to let you know what we're up to, who might be joining us. Will they be Pleiadians? Will they be humans? I don't know. You'll have to find out.
So stay tuned to find out. Make sure your notification is on so you're aware of when we come back and what to look forward to. Thank you so much for joining us at season 1. We are so happy you were here, and we can't wait to see you again.